We had to overcome the psychology that with the Democrats in the legislature, that while we had all done the right thing, it was unpopular and therefore they ought to try to backtrack. So I spent a lot of time trying to keep the Democrats from introducing bills to eliminate our temporary income tax. Of course, most people didn't believe it was temporary. They always thought when you raise a tax, it's going to be permanent. But it always had a triggering mechanism to go off as unemployment went down. And so keeping them from trying to repeal our plan was a huge struggle. And of course, the Republicans were continually waving a stick in their face saying, see, because we only really had one Republican vote. It was enough to turn the tide in the Senate. Harry DeMasso, a very courageous, to this day, my dear friend from Battle Creek. So dealing with that while we're trying to launch our youth corps and our commerce development programs and our road building programs and all those other things, research in, excellence and research fund for universities. But the backdrop was always people saying, oh my God, maybe we did the right thing, or we did the right thing, but it's unpopular, we're all going to be ruined. Well, once the recall movement lost steam, then things settled down. And once we had that ballot proposal victory in November of 1984, things then worked out reasonably well. Yeah, I think they have, and I think it's unfortunate because with term limits, which has been a disaster in Michigan, and basically a totally dysfunctional legislature, and the campaign money that's being thrown around in Lansing is also a real scandal. So with all that, you have a lot of people who think kind of life began with Ronald Reagan, or 2 senators got recalled, so anyone who votes to raise a tax, whether it's a gas tax or a fee or anything, is going to be ruined. They don't know the story that our plan was on the ballot, as I'm repeating again, and we prevailed. We prevailed, over 60%. They forget that. They only think about the 2 guys that got recalled, who were really very fine people. But they were in districts that we were lucky to have won. And secondly, the strategy was not to fight them. They did not want me in there campaigning, explaining we'd done the right thing. They were recalled over voting for the tax increase. They did not want me anywhere near there. The strategy of the legislature was to poo-poo the recalls, try to hope that people will forget about it, and then just basically say that this is not the right process. You should wait till the election if you don't like it. And to argue process rather than substance. And it wasn't until we lost 2 people and we went out and started battling on the substance that we did the right thing to save the state. The state was broke. It had borrowed money from the Japanese. It had the lowest credit rating in the nation. No one would invest in us if we won't pay our bills. Once we made the substantive argument, the recalls dissipated. But the initial 2 recalls were all, oh, you shouldn't do this. It's not the right process. And I think to this very day, in the legislature, especially among people with no experience and no sense of history, they just are worried about anything. And that's how the state has gotten into terrible financial trouble. It's why our roads are crumbling. It's why our new governor, Governor Snyder, is having such a hard time trying to get people to deal with reality. And I'm not saying I agree with everything he's doing, but he's trying to figure out how to repair the state. It's why Governor Granholm in her 2nd term, when she finally dealt with the structural deficit, had such a hard time getting the legislature to deal with it, is people go up there and they just want to survive. And even with term limits, they spend their time worrying about what is the next office they're going to run for. So there is not a real knowledge base in the legislature in Lansing. Almost none. There's no memory bank. There's no sense of continuity. Legislators do not have to live with the consequences of what they do. They do not have to live with their decisions in the future. They're spending way too much time reacting to threats from constituents or reacting to the amount of money they can collect for another office. So we have a very bad situation in Lansing. They should abolish term limits. Maybe we need a unicameral legislature elected on a nonpartisan basis. We need something to shake Lansing out of its insomnia. And I'm not laying this on the governor's office, by the way. I'm looking at and I think Governor Engler, by the way, and certainly Governor Granholm and Milliken would agree with me. Term limits are a terrible thing. I never supported them. Some people did. They're a terrible thing. They are terrible for Michigan and Michigan's future. They're a gimmick that's gone awry, and the people are paying dearly.